Mark hadn't planned on setting foot in his lakeside cabin that weekend. His work schedule had been brutal, and he'd told himself he would stay home and catch up on rest. But at the last minute, his Friday afternoon meeting was canceled, and he decided on a whim to take the drive out of the city. The cabin was his sanctuary, a place built by his father decades ago and restored by his own hands, where the quiet of the lake and the rustle of the pines washed away every ounce of stress. He imagined himself sitting by the fire pit with a cold beer or tinkering with the old canoe that always seemed to need patching. But the moment his truck rolled down the gravel driveway, his stomach dropped. There were cars parked everywhere, strange ones, not his family's, not even from neighbors. A gray sedan sat half on the grass, an SUV blocked part of the path, and a beat-up motorcycle leaned dangerously close to one of his young maple trees. He turned off the engine, listening for the sound of loons on the lake, but instead he heard loud music, laughter, and the thud of footsteps inside his cabin. His cabin. Heart-pounding, he climbed out of the truck, scanning the vehicles. They had out-of-state plates. Strangers. He grabbed his keys tight in his fist as he approached the door. The sight inside made his jaw lock in fury. Beer bottles were scattered across his coffee table, pizza boxes balanced on the arm of his leather couch, and wet towels were slung carelessly over the dining chairs. For people lounged inside like they owned the place. A couple in swimsuits laughing as they scrolled through their phones, another man trying to work the fireplace, and a young woman snapping pictures with her camera. They froze when they saw him. "You're not Karen," one of them muttered, setting down his drink with a guilty look. Mark's voice was sharp as he demanded, "What are you doing in my house?" The group exchanged nervous glances before one of them piped up, "We rented this place for the weekend. Karen said it was available." That name hit him like a hammer. Karen. The same Karen who had spent years harassing him over meaningless HOA rules. The same woman who had fined him for leaving a canoe on the dock overnight and tried to stop him from repainting the shutters because it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. She had always acted like the cabin was hers to control. But this was a line crossed into theft. Mark forced the strangers outside, telling them to wait while he stormed down the street. His boots crunched on the gravel as anger surged in his chest. Sure enough, there she was, kneeling in her garden with a smug little smirk when she saw him coming. "Care to explain why strangers are partying in my cabin?" he demanded. Karen stood, dusting her gloves off with the arrogance of someone who thought she could never be challenged. "Those are my guests," she said coolly. "I manage rentals for the community. It's common courtesy to let the property serve others if you're not using it. Besides, you weren't supposed to be here this weekend." Mark felt his jaw tighten. "Not supposed to be here? This is my cabin. You don't get to decide who steps foot inside." Karen's smirk widened as if she had rehearsed this confrontation. "Don't get so territorial. It's a better use of space. And frankly, Mark, you should be thanking me. I'm making this place relevant. People are willing to pay good money to stay here. Maybe I'll even cut you in if you behave." Her tone dripped with condescension, as though she were doing him a favor by renting out his own home behind his back. Mark stared at her, barely believing what he was hearing. In that moment, one thing became clear. This wasn't just Karen being nosy or nitpicking HOA rules. This was Karen treating his property like her personal Airbnb, cashing in while he was away, and she actually thought she could get away with it. I stood there in the shadows of my own cabin, listening as Karen barked orders like she owned the place. The so-called guests had been sipping wine on my porch, their laughter carrying through the cool evening air. But now they looked nervous as Karen pulled them aside and whispered, glancing over her shoulder at me as if I were some kind of intruder. My blood boiled, but I bit back the urge to storm in immediately. Instead, I snapped pictures, license plates, faces, even the cheap "Welcome to your vacation cabin" sign she had pinned to the door. When I finally revealed myself, her eyes went wide, but she quickly recovered, shouting at the top of her lungs, "This man is trespassing. Call the police." Her shrill voice echoed through the trees, and the guests looked at me like I was the criminal. I pulled my key from my pocket and slid it into the lock, while everyone watched, the door swinging open to reveal my living room completely rearranged. My antique fishing gear had been shoved into a corner, family photos were turned face down, and in their place were neatly stacked towels, a rack of brochures, and even a framed printout of cabin rules by host Karen. My hands shook as I looked around at what had once been my safe retreat. Karen marched right in after me, wagging her finger. "You can't just break in. This is private property being rented under contract," she yelled, her face red. I could hardly believe the audacity. The guests shuffled behind her, muttering about refunds, clearly realizing something was off. I calmly turned on my phone's camera and filmed as I walked through every room. My bedroom, now stripped of personal bedding and stocked with cheap linens, my kitchen pantry emptied of food and filled with labeled plastic bins, even my study, where Karen had the nerve to stack Airbnb-branded cleaning supplies. "You've been running a business out of my cabin," I said, my voice low and controlled. She crossed her arms and smirked. "The community needs more income, and you weren't using it anyway. Consider it my way of helping." The arrogance nearly broke me, but before I could respond, headlights appeared at the end of the drive. 2 squad cars rolled up, lights flashing, and Karen let out a fake gasp of relief, rushing toward them. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man broke into my property and threatened my paying guests." The sheer gall of her words twisted my stomach, but I stayed silent, waiting. When the officers stepped up, I handed them my driver's license, my property deed, which I had in the glove compartment from some recent insurance paperwork, and then, calmly, the keys. "This is my cabin," I said. "She's been renting it out without permission." One officer's brow furrowed as he compared the documents, but Karen wasn't backing down. She kept her performance going, fake tears welling up in her eyes as she wailed about dangerous men showing up at night. The guests stood awkwardly behind her, clearly uncomfortable now, but unwilling to intervene. I could see the officers wavering, caught between her theatrics and the cold evidence in my hand. My patience was thinning, but deep inside, I knew the real fireworks were about to begin, because I had one piece of proof she could never spin away, and it was already uploading to the cloud. The night air was tense, the flashing red and blue lights, bouncing across the trees like a spotlight on Karen's lies. She kept sobbing and gesturing dramatically to the officers, but I could see cracks forming in her act as I pulled out my phone. "Officers," I said steadily, keeping my voice calm and measured, "before you make a decision, I think you'll want to see this." With a few taps, I opened the cloud folder where my security camera footage was stored. I had installed discrete cameras inside the cabin years ago after a break-in, and they had been running every time Karen's so-called guests showed up. I handed the phone to one of the officers, who leaned close as the video played. Karen welcoming a group of strangers through the door, smiling broadly as she handed over keys on a lanyard that was mine, guiding them through the rooms like she was a tour guide. "As you can see," I added, "she's been listing my cabin on Airbnb. Here's the public listing page, too." I flipped to the screenshot I had taken earlier, showing the cabin photos, my furniture, my dock, even my fishing boat, captioned with the title, "Cozy Mountain Retreat Hosted by Karen." The guests' faces turned pale as they leaned closer, realizing they had been duped. One of them muttered, "So, this really isn't her place." The officers exchanged a long look before stepping back toward Karen, whose expression had gone from crocodile tears to wide-eyed panic. "Ma'am," one of them said firmly, "we're going to need to hear your explanation for this." She stammered, her hands waving frantically. It was for the good of the community. He wasn't even here. Why should such a beautiful cabin sit empty when it could make money for everyone?" The entitlement in her voice was staggering, and one of the guests finally snapped. "We paid you $1,200 for the week. You told us this was your family cabin. You lied to us." Their angry words hit her harder than mine ever could. Karen tried to recover, but it was too late. The officers were already on their radios, calling in to verify my ownership records, which matched perfectly with the deed I had handed over. Within minutes, the mood shifted completely. One officer turned to me and said, "Sir, you're free to lock your property. We'll be filing a report for trespassing and fraud." Relief washed over me, though I kept my jaw clenched as Karen exploded, screaming that this was unfair, that I was selfish, that I didn't deserve the cabin anyway. They cuffed her right there on the porch she had turned into her personal check-in desk, her voice echoing through the night until the squad car door shut her up for good. The guests, looking both embarrassed and angry, apologized profusely, saying they'd be leaving immediately. I told them not to worry. I'd already captured every detail of Karen's scheme. By the time the sun rose the next morning, her fake Airbnb profile was deleted, my cabin was secured again, and I had already forwarded the footage and documents to both the HOA board and a lawyer. Karen thought she could rewrite ownership with her arrogance and theatrics, but all she did was sign her own downfall. As I locked the cabin door and looked out over the still lake, I couldn't help but smirk. HOA! Karen had called the cops to scare me off, but in the end, she had only delivered herself straight into handcuffs.